Early Quakers emerged in the middle of the 17th century as a religious movement coming out of the radical wing of English Puritanism. What's most distinctive about early Friends is their sense that everyone has a direct inward relationship with God in spirit, and there's no need, therefore, for separate external liturgies or a set-apart priesthood or especially sacred places, because what matters is that direct inward experience of God in spirit.
Swarthmoor Hall was the home of the Fell family, and that was Judge Thomas Fell, who's a parliamentarian judge, and Margaret Fell, his wife, who was a very influential figure in the Quaker movement, and then their 8 children.
They were interested in religious ideas. I think they might call themselves seekers, and when Margaret heard George Fox preaching at Ulverston Church, she was convinced of the Quaker faith. And so the whole family, apart from Judge Fell, became part of the Quaker movement.
Margaret Fell was intelligent and courageous, and by the standards of her time, she was really comfortably well off. But she wasn't afraid to give all that up and to put it all on the line for her religious beliefs.
She was able to be an effective organiser. She was able to support George Fox. She was very much his champion, and she supported him throughout his life. George Fox is often regarded as the principal founder of the Quaker movement, although there were many other people, including Margaret Fell, involved in that. During his early adulthood, he went out seeking, looking for a meaningful faith, and he tried all the available religious groups that were around.
He was very unsatisfied with the behaviour of the established church and the inconsistency and the lack of integrity that a lot of preachers and priests had. And so he went travelling and he collected together a group of like-minded people, so other people who'd been thinking similar things, had been seeking a different way of doing religion. And he kind of gathered them all together and he created a sort of an identity. They called themselves the Friends of the Truth initially, and they became known as Quakers.
In many ways, Swarthmoor Hall became the headquarters of the earliest Quaker movement, so that Quakers could come together, share ideas, prepare for the major preaching campaigns that they were involved in.
It was a place where Quakers could retreat when their preaching efforts went wrong locally, which did happen sometimes, and it was a hub for local Quakers as well and became their meeting house for the first 30 years. George Fox understood that Swarthmoor Hall was a family home, and at some point it might not belong to Quakers, and so that Quakers needed their own meeting house.
This meeting house is probably the last legacy of George Fox.
George Fox, and particularly Margaret Fell, were very astute. They knew that in order for Quakerism to thrive, as well as the spiritual aspect in the ministry, they knew that we would need a strong structure, and that included a financial structure. Margaret Fell in particular encouraged people to give as one of the many things that we could do to support the faith.
One of the things that Margaret Fell did that is really significant is to establish a system of fundraising that was needed to support the kind of preaching campaigns that Quakers were involved with. In 1654, she established something called the Kendall Fund, which collected money from Quakers and those who were sympathetic in the northwest of England, and that money was used to support travelling ministers. It also supported the families that they left behind, and also began to support people who were suffering due to poverty and so on within the Quaker community.
And in 1654, she wrote an epistle to all friends, encouraging them to donate. George and Margaret, as a partnership, really created an identity for Quakers. They created the system of meetings and discernment, which Quakers still use today. Margaret was the person who arguably created the peace testimony. One of the times she went down to London to speak with Charles II about the rights of Quakers, she articulated that they were a peaceful people, and she gave scriptural reasons why they were peaceful and anti-violence.
And that resulted actually in the first written declaration of the Quaker peace testimony some months before the famous one that we remember that was written by the Quaker men.
And we mustn't forget that without Margaret Fell, Quakerism probably wouldn't have survived. She was classed as the mother of Quakerism and supported George Fox financially as well as spiritually.
Swarthmoor Hall is important for a number of reasons. It's obviously a big part of our history, but it's also important for today. It represents values around sustainability, and it also gives us inspiration for how we want to live as Quakers today.
It has a spiritual and a calm feel. And even people who come because they're history buffs or something, or they like looking at old buildings themselves, they quite often say, "Isn't it peaceful here? Isn't it peaceful?" People worshipping there, people going there for retreats and things, it's all adding to the atmosphere that then other people who are not even looking for it do pick up on it.
I appreciate so much what the Quakers in the past, what they did to support the faith. It's really important that we also think about the future and the future generations of people who are going to just really value Swarthmoor Hall and also value Quakerism.